The sky burned red over Varian 3. Smoke rolled like black waves, covering the broken land where cities once stood. Fires danced on the metal ruins, and the air tasted like iron and dust. The war between humans and the Tauran Empire had turned this planet into a graveyard. Captain Elias Ward stood on the edge of what used to be a research station, his armor scratched, his rifle humming with low energy. He had been fighting for 16 hours straight, leading a small squad of human soldiers through chaos. His orders were clear: secure the area, rescue survivors, and retreat before the next bombardment. But now, standing in the silence after the storm, Elias heard something that didn't fit the battlefield, a sound that wasn't war. It was faint at first, a soft cry, like a whimper carried by the wind. He froze and raised a hand for his team to stop. "Captain," his sergeant asked to the helmet speaker. "What is it?" Elias didn't answer. He listened again. There was short, broken sobs echoing to the ruins ahead. He frowned. There were no human civilians left on Varian 3. They had been evacuated weeks ago before the Tauran invasion began. Whoever was crying out there wasn't supposed to be alive. The sergeant checked the scanner. "No human signatures, sir. Only radiation and debris." Elias's eyes narrowed. "Then what's making that sound?" The others looked uneasy. Everyone knew the Tauran didn't take prisoners. If there were voices out there, it could be a trap. The enemy sometimes used fake distress calls to lure soldiers into ambushes. But Elias wasn't the kind of man to walk away from a cry for help. Not once in his entire service record. He motioned for silence and began moving toward the sound, stepping carefully over twisted metal and broken glass. The world around him was quiet except for the crunch of his boots. Above, the clouds glowed orange from the fires still burning miles away. "Sir, command says extraction is in 10 minutes, the sergeant whispered. "If we don't make it back to the LZ by then—" "I heard," Elias cut in. "We'll make it." He kept walking. As he moved through the wreckage, he thought of home, of Earth's blue skies and the smell of rain after long summers. It felt like a dream now, something distant and almost unreal. Out here, everything was metal, dust, and pain. He reached what looked like a collapsed corridor. The walls had melted from plasma fire, and shards of glass were fused into strange shapes. The cry was louder now, clear and scared. Elias knelt beside the rubble, scanning the area. His visor flickered. There, heat signatures, small, weak, and close together. 3 of them. He spoke softly into the comm. "I've got life signs. Small ones. Could be younglings." "Sir, if they're Tauran—" "I know what they are," he said quietly. "Keep the channel clear. The Tauran, humanity's greatest enemy. A reptilian species with scaled skin, long tails, and eyes that burned yellow in the dark. They had attacked human colonies without warning 5 years ago. Millions had died. Since then, neither side showed mercy. Elias knew this. He had seen it firsthand. The Tauran soldiers who burned villages, the friends he lost on frozen moons. But when he looked at the scanner and saw those faint life signs, he didn't see monsters. He saw someone small, weak, and afraid. He started pulling at the debris. His hand shook as he lifted a metal beam, careful not to make noise. Beneath it, something moved, a tiny hand with dark green scales. His breath caught. It wasn't a soldier. It was a child. 3 of them, huddled together under shattered panels, their small bodies covered in dust. Their large eyes stared up at him, filled with fear. Elias froze. For a second, time stopped. He could hear only the beating of his heart. These were Tauran younglings, the children of the enemy. His calm burst with static. "Captain Ward, we're surrounded. We need to move now." He turned his head, hearing distant gunfire. The towering forces were closing in. His team needed him. The evacuation ship wouldn't wait. But when he looked back at the children, he couldn't move. One of them was crying softly, clutching the other's hand. Their small tails trembled. They didn't understand what was happening. He lowered his rifle and spoke gently, knowing they couldn't understand his words. "It's okay, you're safe now." He removed his helmet, letting them see his face. His skin was pale, his eyes tired but kind. The smallest Tauren tilted its head, curious and afraid. Then an explosion shook the ground. Dust rained from above. The cries turned to screams. Elias covered them with his body as another blast tore through the building. His calm buzzed again, his sergeant shouting his name, but he didn't respond. He was staying. When the smoke cleared, he looked down. The children were still alive. Shaken but alive. "Captain," the sergeant's voice cracked. "If you don't get out now, you'll die down there." Elias stared at the horizon. The sky was red, the world burning. But inside that ruin, 3 lives looked up at him. 3 lives that should never have been his responsibility. And yet, in that moment, he made his choice. He grabbed his rifle and turned toward the distant sound of battle. "No one dies today," he said under his breath. He didn't care who they were, human or Tauren. They were children, and he was going to save them. Smoke drifted through the ruins as Captain Elias Ward pushed deeper into the shattered corridor. His armor was dented, his rifle low on charge, and the only sound in his ears was the soft, frightened breathing of the 3 Tauren children behind him. They followed him closely, their steps light and trembling. The smallest one, with pale green scales and golden eyes, held his finger like a lifeline. Elias didn't pull away. He just kept walking, scanning the shadows for movement. Outside, the battle raged on. Plasma fire lit the horizon, and explosions shook the ground every few seconds. His comm unit hissed again. "Captain Ward, report. We got enemy squads moving from the east. Extraction in 5 minutes." He pressed the side of his helmet. "Negative," he said quietly. "I've got civilians, non-human. I'm bringing them out." There was silence, then a sharp voice. "Civilians? You mean Tauren?" Elias didn't answer. He switched off the channel. Command wouldn't understand. Nobody would. He crouched behind a broken wall and looked back at the children. They huddled together, eyes wide, tails curled tight in fear. One of them, slightly older, maybe 7 or 8 years by human measure, had a small wound on its arm. The scales were cracked, and dark blue blood oozed out slowly. Elias tore a strip from his sleeve and wrapped it gently around the wound. The child winced but didn't pull away. "There," he said softly. "That should hold for now." They didn't understand his words, but his tone calmed them. One of the younger ones tilted its head and made a soft chirping sound, something like a thank you. For a moment, Elias almost smiled, but then another explosion thundered nearby, and he ducked low, pulling the children down with him. "Stay close," he whispered. "No noise." The Tauren army was sweeping the area. Their scanners were hunting for survivors, human or otherwise. If they found him with their young, they wouldn't hesitate. They'd kill him on sight. To them, he would be the monster. Elias's mind raced. The evac zone was 2 kilometers west across open ground. No cover. No allies. He had 5 minutes to get there before the last ship left orbit. 5 minutes to make an impossible choice. He could run now, alone and live, or stay and die trying to save the enemy's children. He looked down at them again. Their eyes were full of fear, but also trust. Trust in him, a human soldier, the same kind who had burned their cities. Elias took a deep breath. "All right," he muttered, almost to himself. "Let's move." He led them through the broken hallways, careful with every step. The walls groaned as if the whole building might collapse at any moment. He pushed a metal door aside and peered outside. The sky was darker now, heavy with ash. A Tauran patrol marched along the ridge in the distance. 5 soldiers in gray armor, their plasma rifles glowing blue. Elias waited until they passed, then motioned the children forward. They ran across a stretch of rubble, ducking behind a destroyed transport vehicle. He checked the scanner, one faint signal moving toward them fast. Not human. He grabbed his rifle and aimed toward the north. A shadow appeared, climbing over the wreckage. A Tauran scout, tall and broad, its armor shining in the firelight. The alien spotted him instantly. Human! It hissed, raising its weapon. Elias fired first. The plasma bolt struck the scout in the chest, sending it crashing backward. The sound echoed through the ruins like thunder. Now they would come. Elias turned to the children. Run. They didn't need translation. They scrambled after him as he dashed through the wreckage. Energy bolts hit the ground around them, sending shards of rock into the air. The smallest child tripped, and Elias spun back, scooping it up in one arm without stopping. He ran until his lungs burned. Behind him, alien voices shouted commands in their harsh tongue. Drones took flight, scanning the area with red beams. He slid down a slope of ash and metal, landing beside a shattered vehicle hull. The children hid behind him, clutching his armor. He checked his power gauge. Rifle almost empty. Armor integrity 23%. Great, he muttered, wiping blood from his lip. He looked toward the horizon. In the distance, he could see the faint blue glow of the extraction beacon, his only way off this planet. It flickered weakly, like a dying star. The radio crackled again. Ward, where the hell are you? The ship's engines are heating. You've got 1 minute. He hesitated. The beacon was close, but so were the Tauran patrols. If he ran with the children, he'd lead the enemy straight to his own people. If he left them, they'd die within minutes. He clenched his jaw. Command, I'm not leaving them. What? Captain, that's an order. Elias didn't reply. He shut off his comm and lifted his rifle again. The children stared up at him, their eyes reflecting the fire around them. He wondered if they could sense his fear, or maybe his determination. Listen, he said quietly, even though they didn't understand. You have families out there. I'll get you to them. You just have to trust me. A blast rocked the ground nearby. The shock wave threw them off balance. Elias fell to one knee, shielding the children with his body. The heat from the explosion seared his armor. When the dust settled, he looked up and saw something that made his blood run cold. A Tauran transport ship was descending nearby. Its insignia marked it as an elite command unit. If the High Command found out he had their younglings, it wouldn't matter who fired first. They'd kill everyone in sight. Elias gripped his weapon and whispered, "We're out of time." He turned toward the children, eyes hard but voice calm. "Stay behind me." The sound of Tauran boots drew closer. Shadows moved in the smoke. The next few minutes would decide everything. Life or death, war or something greater. As Elias took his position, ready to face the impossible, the galaxy held its breath. The wind howled to the broken city as Captain Elias Ward crouched behind a half-collapsed wall, his breathing sharp and shallow. The 3 Tauran children huddled close behind him, their wide eyes glowing faintly in the smoke-filled air. The smallest clung to his armor, trembling. The older one tried to be brave, pressing its scaly hands against its younger sibling's mouth to keep them quiet. Elias peeked over the wall. Across the ruins, shadows moved, Tauran soldiers, scanning the wreckage with bright blue beams. Their guttural voices echoed through the streets. He could hear them barking orders. "Human alive, bring his head." The enemy knew he was here. And worse, they were closing in fast. He checked his rifle. 2 charges left. His armor's power core blinked red, a warning that meant no more shields. He was running on borrowed time. He looked at the children. They were terrified. They didn't know that the man protecting them was supposed to be their enemy. All they saw was someone who hadn't left them behind. "Stay low," Elias whispered. His voice was calm, even though his heart hammered like thunder. "Do not move until I say." They didn't understand the words, but they understood his tone. The older one nodded quickly. He took a deep breath and moved out from behind cover, crawling through the debris. The smell of burning metal filled his helmet. Somewhere far off, another explosion painted the sky orange. He needed to move west, toward the canyon that led to the evacuation zone. If he could reach that ridge, there might still be a chance. But the open ground ahead was crawling with Tauran troops. He reached down and touched the pennant around his neck, a small metal tag with the words, "Earth Defense Forces, Ward Elias." It was all he had left of home. He whispered to himself, "Come on, Elias." One more fight. Then the first plasma bolt hit. It slammed into the wall behind him, showering sparks across the rubble. Elias dubbed the ground, rolling over as more shots followed. The air lit up in flashes of blue and white. The Tauran soldiers shouted, advancing through the ruins. Elias raised his rifle and fired. One shot, clean and fast. The nearest enemy fell. Another blast caught a second in the shoulder, but then his rifle clicked dry. No charge left. He cursed under his breath. Tossing the weapon aside, he grabbed a broken steel bar from the ground, heavy and sharp enough to use as a blade. He waited until the next soldier rounded the corner, then swung. The bar hit the Tauran's helmet with a sickening crack, sending it sprawling backward. Elias ripped the sidearm from the alien's belt and fired into the smoke, hitting another target. "Move!" he yelled, turning to the children. They ran, their small feet slipping on the ash-covered ground. Elias followed. Firing burst behind them to keep the enemy back. The air was chaos, fire, smoke, and screams. The oldest child tripped over a piece of wreckage. Elias rushed to pull it up, but a bolt hit his shoulder plate, sending him crashing to the ground. Pain exploded down his arm. He groaned, forcing himself up. The children were crying now, their voices sharp and desperate. He couldn't stop, not now. He dragged himself forward, gripping his arm, and shouted, "Keep going! Keep going!" They reached a broken tunnel entrance, a dark hole leading under the street. Perfect cover. Elias pushed the children inside and crouched at the entrance, firing blindly toward the advancing Tauran troops. His stolen weapon overheated, glowing red in his hand. He threw aside and ducked into the tunnel, just as the enemy fire tore through the wall behind him. Inside, it was pitch black. Only the faint hum of his armor lights broke the darkness. He could hear the children whimpering softly. "It's all right," he said between breaths. "We're safe for now." He leaned back against the wall, his body aching. Blood trickled down his arm inside the armor. His shoulder felt like it was on fire. But he didn't care. The kids were alive. He reached into his pack and pulled out a small light stick, cracking it to fill the tunnel with a pale blue glow. The children stared at it in wonder. The smallest reached out and touched it gently, its little claws clicking against the plastic. Elias smiled weakly. "Yeah, it's just a light. Humans use them when it's dark." He couldn't explain what human meant to them, but maybe someday they'd understand. The ground above rumbled. Tauran troops moving across the surface. They were searching. Elias turned off the light. Silence filled the tunnel. Dust fell from the ceiling. He held his breath as heavy footsteps passed overhead. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the sound faded. He exhaled slowly, relief washing over him. But he knew it wouldn't last. The Tauren would keep hunting. He needed a plan. The tunnel could lead to the canyon if they were lucky, but it might also lead straight into the enemy base. He had no map, no signal, no backup, only his instincts. He looked at the children again. The smallest one had fallen asleep, leaning against his knee. The others watched him silently, their eyes shining in the dim light. He felt something stir in his chest, a strange warmth he hadn't felt in years. He'd lost his entire squad in the early days of the war. He thought he'd buried every piece of his heart with them. But now, somehow, these alien children had brought it back. He sighed and whispered, "I'll get you out of here, no matter what it takes." Outside, thunder rolled through the sky as another bombardment began. The city shook, dust raining from the ceiling. The children clung to him tightly, eyes wide with fear. Elias wrapped his arms around them and whispered, "Close your eyes. It'll be over soon." The blast faded. The world grew still again. But deep in that silence, a faint sound began to rise. Mechanical hums, engines, and distant voices. The Tauren had found the tunnel. Elias opened his eyes, pulled the children close, and prepared for the next fight. The war wasn't over. Not yet. The ground trembled as Captain Elias Ward crouched in the dark tunnel, clutching the sidearm he'd stolen from a fallen Tauren soldier. Behind him, the three alien children huddled together, their small eyes glowing faintly in the shadows. Dust drifted from the cracked ceiling. Above them, heavy boots thudded across the surface. The Tauren patrol had found the tunnel entrance. Elias's heart pounded. He could hear the clicking sound of scanners sweeping the area. Red light beams flashed through cracks in the debris above, searching for life forms. He whispered to himself, "Not yet, just a little longer." The children didn't understand his words, but they understood the fear in his voice. They pressed closer to him, trembling. The youngest one, small, pale green, barely more than a baby, hid its face against his arm. Elias placed a gloved hand on its head, trying to keep it calm. He could hear voices above, harsh and cold. The Tauren commander barked orders in their guttural language, and a moment later, the sound of drilling began. They were opening the tunnel entrance. Elias cursed under his breath. He had seconds, maybe less. He turned to the children and pointed deeper into the tunnel. "Go," he whispered urgently. "Move." They hesitated, frightened, but the oldest understood. It took the younger ones by the hands and started forward. Elias followed close behind, keeping his weapon aimed at the ceiling as the rumbling grew louder. Then came the explosion. The world erupted behind them, a blast that shook the tunnel like an earthquake. Fire and debris roared through the passage, throwing Elias forward. The children screamed as rocks crashed around them. Elias landed hard, his armor scraping against stone. He coughed through the smoke and grabbed the smallest child before it could slip away in the darkness. The air was thick and burning. "Keep moving," he shouted, his voice echoing through the tunnel. They stumbled through the dust, half blind, the ground shaking under their feet. The sound of collapsing metal followed close behind. After what felt like forever, they reached a split in the tunnel. One path led deeper underground. The other sloped upward, where faint light filtered through the cracks. Elias paused, breathing hard. The upward path meant open ground, and open ground meant death. But the lower tunnel could collapse any second. He made the choice instantly. Up we go. He lifted the youngest child onto his back and started climbing. The older two followed, struggling but determined. They emerged into daylight, or what passed for daylight on Varian 3. The sky was thick with smoke, but at least it wasn't pitch black anymore. They were inside the skeleton of a ruined factory. Massive steel beams reached into the air like the bones of a giant. Fires burned in the distance, painting the sky orange. Elias scanned the horizon. To the west, He could see the canyon, a jagged scar across the land. That was his goal. If he could reach it, maybe there'd still be a signal strong enough to call for extraction. But then he saw movement. 3 towering scouts were climbing the nearby ridge, scanning the area. They hadn't seen him yet, but they would soon. Elias crouched low and whispered, "Stay quiet." The children ducked behind him. He waited until the scouts turned away, then sprinted across the open ground. His armor clanked softly with every step, but he moved fast, keeping low. They weaved between shattered walls and broken machinery, each second a fight for breath. His muscles burned, but he didn't slow down. Behind them, a gunshot cracked the air. Then another. The scouts had spotted them. "Run," Elias shouted. The children ran as fast as they could. Plasma bolts hit the ground beside them, sending up bursts of dirt and flame. Elias fired back, short bursts, forcing the enemy to take cover. He reached a fallen transport and dove behind it, pulling the children close. He checked his ammo, 2 shots left. That was it. He looked around desperately. To his right, the factory wall had a gap blown through it, an escape route. Beyond it, the canyon edge shimmered in the heat. "Almost there," he muttered. He picked up the smallest child again and gestured for the others to follow. Then he ran. The scouts shouted in their native tongue, firing after them. Bolts sizzled past his head. One struck his leg armor, spinning him to the ground. He grit his teeth and kept crawling, shielding the child with his body. The oldest towering child ran back to him, grabbing his hand and trying to pull him up. Elias forced a smile through the pain. "Go. Don't stop." But the child refused to leave him. For a moment, the war disappeared. The smoke, the noise, all of it. It was just a wounded man and a brave little alien trying to save each other. Elias found his strength again. He rose, limping but determined, and together they made the final sprint to the gap in the wall. They tumbled down the slope on the other side, rolling through dust and stone until they landed in the canyon below. The sound of gunfire faded above them. Elias lay still for a moment, gasping. The children gathered around him, eyes wide and scared. He smiled weakly. "We made it," he said. The youngest one touched his face, chirping softly. The sound was gentle, grateful. Elias leaned back against the rocks, staring at the sky. Above, ships moved through the clouds, both human and towering. The war raged on, uncaring. But here, in this moment, there was something different, a small, quiet truth that neither side could destroy. He had saved them, and they had saved him. He looked toward the canyon's edge. The next step would be harder, crossing it under enemy fire. But for now, they were alive. He closed his eyes and whispered, "Rest while you can. We move at dusk." The children curled up beside him, their small bodies trembling from exhaustion. As the fires of war burned above them, one human soldier sat in the shadows of a ruined world, guarding the children of his enemy. Because sometimes courage wasn't about killing. The canyon was silent, except for the whisper of wind sweeping through the rocks. Smoke still hung in the air, curling like ghostly hands above the shattered land. Captain Elias Ward sat with his back against a stone wall, his armor cracked, his leg wrapped in torn cloth. Every breath hurt, but he didn't stop watching the horizon. The 3 towering children slept near him, curled up close for warmth. The smallest one, he called it Little Ash, because of the pale dust that covered its scales, breathed softly, its tiny chest rising and falling. The other 2, older but still young, slept side by side, their tails intertwined like frightened kittens. Elias reached down and adjusted the broken plate on his armor. The wound beneath was deep, but not fatal. He'd seen worse. He told himself that. He had to. Above them, faint thunder rolled through the clouds. Not weather, Artillery. The war hadn't stopped. The Tauran and humans were still killing each other somewhere beyond the smoke. Elias stared into the dark sky and muttered, "You can burn the whole planet, but not here. Not tonight." He looked down at the children. In another time, another place, they might have been enemies. But here, they were just kids who wanted to live. And he was the only one who could keep that promise. A soft sound drew his attention. One of the older Tauran children, tall for its age with gray-blue scales, was awake. It blinked at him, nervous, then pointed at his bleeding leg. Elias smiled faintly. "Yeah, that's going to leave a mark." The child tilted its head, confused by his words, but seemed to understand his calm tone. It crawled closer and tore a strip from its own tattered cloak. Then, with slow, careful hands, it started to tie the fabric over his wound. Elias blinked in surprise. "Hey, what are you doing?" The child didn't answer, of course. It just worked quietly, eyes focused, determined. He let out a tired laugh. "You're supposed to be the one I'm saving." The Tauran finished tying the knot and looked up at him with a small, proud expression. Elias gave a small nod of thanks. "Good work, soldier." The child didn't understand the word, but it smiled anyway. For a few minutes, there was peace, only the sound of wind and distant thunder. Then, from somewhere far above, came a deep rumble. Elias frowned and looked up. The sky flashed with orange light, then another, brighter one. He recognized it instantly. Orbital strikes. His stomach dropped. Command must have ordered a full bombardment of this region. That meant everything within 10 kilometers would be turned to glass, including them. He scrambled to his feet, pain shooting through his leg. The children woke up at his sudden movement, confused and scared. He grabbed his rifle and checked the charge. Still empty, worthless. But he wasn't thinking about fighting anymore. He was thinking about escape. He looked around. The canyon stretched west toward a series of cliffs. If he could climb high enough, maybe they could find an old communications tower or a signal beacon. Something to call for help. He turned to the children and motioned toward the cliffs. "We move now." They didn't understand the words, but they followed him. Their small feet kicked up dust as they ran. The sky grew brighter, orbital fires streaking down like falling stars. Behind them, explosions ripped across the land, each one closer than the last. The air grew hot, filled with static and ash. Elias pushed the children ahead, yelling over the roar, "Keep going! Don't look back!" They reached the base of a broken rock wall. It wasn't tall, but steep enough to slow them down. Elias lifted the smallest one first, helping it climb. Then the others. Above them, the sky cracked open. A blast hit somewhere nearby, throwing heat across the canyon. Elias's armor flared from the shockwave, his body thrown against the rocks. He gritted his teeth and dragged himself up. The children were waiting at the top, calling to him in frightened chirps. Elias climbed, one hand at a time, ignoring the pain. He pulled himself over the ledge just as another blast turned the canyon floor into fire. They were safe, barely. He collapsed on the ground, coughing, the children surrounding him. His vision blurred from the heat, but when he looked up, he saw something that made him smile despite everything. A beacon, half buried in the dirt a few hundred meters ahead. An old human distress transmitter flickered weakly, probably left behind by a crashed unit long ago. Elias laughed under his breath. "You've got to be kidding me." He forced himself up and limped toward it. The children followed. When he reached the beacon, he wiped the dust from his control panel. It was cracked but functional. He powered it on. The machine buzzed and blinked, its antenna extending slowly. The signal light flashed green. "Come on," Elias whispered. "Work for me." Static filled his helmet for a few seconds. Then a voice broke through. "This is command. Identify yourself." He almost couldn't believe it. "This is Captain Elias Ward, Earth Defense Forces. I have non-human civilians. Repeat, enemy civilians. Request immediate extraction." There was a long pause. Then the voice returned, cold and uncertain. "Enemy civilians? Captain, confirm. Are you harboring Tauren?" Elias closed his eyes and said, "They're children. And yes, I am." Another silence. The next voice was different, calmer. "Understood, Captain. Hold position. We're tracking your signal. Extraction inbound in 15 minutes. Elias let out a long breath. "Copy that." He turned toward the children, who were watching the blinking light curiously. He smiled and whispered, "Told you I'd keep my promise." They didn't understand the words, but one of them reached out and touched his arm gently, as if it did. The bombardment raged on in the distance, the world burning. But for the first time, there was hope, small, fragile, but real. Elias sat beside the beacon, guarding the children as the wind howled across the cliffs. His body was broken, his strength fading, but his eyes stayed sharp. He had made a promise, and a soldier always keeps his word. The wind roared across the cliffs, carrying the distant thunder of explosions. The world below burned like a dying star. Captain Elias Ward crouched beside the blinking distress beacon, his armor blackened with ash, his breathing ragged. 15 minutes. That's what command had promised. 15 minutes until extraction. It had already been 10. The 3 Tauren children waited near him, their small forms trembling from exhaustion and fear. The smallest one, little Ash, kept glancing at the sky, where streaks of fire fell like meteors. The other 2 stood close together, holding hands. Elias checked the beacon again. Its signal light flickered weakly. He prayed the connection held. A voice crackled in his ear. "Captain Ward, this is Raven 2. We're inbound but taking heavy fire. ETA 5 minutes. Can you reach an open spot for pickup?" Elias scanned the area. The cliffs around them were jagged, unstable. The only open ground was a canyon below, wide, flat, and fully exposed. He swallowed hard. "Copy that, Raven 2. I'll make you a landing zone." He turned to the children and pointed down the slope. "We have to go," he said firmly, though his voice trembled from fatigue. "Now." They didn't understand his words, but they followed his tone. The oldest nodded quickly and took the other's hands. Elias started down the rocky slope, each step sending small stones tumbling. His leg burned with every movement, but he kept going. He could see the faint shimmer of the canyon floor below, scorched, but open enough for the dropship. Then the sound came, a deep mechanical whine, followed by the heavy thump of engines. Towering gunships. Elias froze, glancing skyward. 2 dark shapes cut through the clouds, heading straight for them. Searchlights flared, sweeping the cliffs. "They found us," he muttered. The children tensed. One of them cried out softly, and Elias turned, pressing a finger to his lips. "Quiet. Stay with me." He quickened his pace, half sliding, half running down the slope. The gunship's lights swept closer, beams slicing through the dust. Plasma bolts rained down, shaking the ground. He dove behind a boulder, shielding the children as explosions echoed around them. The heat was unbearable. His radio hissed again. "Raven 2 to Ward, what's your status?" Under fire, Elias grunted. Gunships overhead. "I'm marking position now." He grabbed a flare from his belt, snapped the cap off, and hurled it into the open. A bright red column of smoke rose into the sky. The gunships turned instantly toward it. "Perfect," he said grimly. The towering ships fired again, plasma rounds slamming into the rocks. Shards of molten metal flew through the air. Elias pushed the children behind cover, then drew his pistol, the last thing he had left. He fired at one of the gunships. The shot did nothing but spark against the hull, but it made them hesitate. Just for a second, a new roar cut through the chaos, a deeper, heavier sound. The human dropship. Raven 2 burst through the smoke like a silver arrow, its engines blazing. It swooped low, guns blazing at the Tauran ships. The sky erupted in fire as plasma bolts and missiles clashed midair. Elias grabbed the children. "That's our ride." He sprinted across the open ground, ignoring the pain that screamed through his leg. The dropship hovered above, ramp lowering, soldiers inside waving him forward. "Come on, Captain," one of them shouted over the roar. But the Tauran weren't done. One of their gunships swung around, aiming directly at the human craft. Its cannons charged, glowing bright blue. Elias saw it and ran faster. He reached the ramp and threw the smallest child inside. Then the other two. But before he could climb aboard, the Tauran ship fired. The blast hit the ground behind him, sending him flying forward. He slammed into the ramp, armor sparking. Inside the dropship, soldiers pulled the children back, yelling for takeoff. Elias groaned, trying to move. His vision blurred. The world spun. "Captain," someone shouted. "We're hit. We have to go." He looked up. The children were staring at him from the ramp, reaching out, their eyes full of terror. He smiled weakly. "You're safe now," he whispered. "That's all that matters." He pushed himself up, grabbing the edge of the ramp. His body felt like lead. His armor alarms blared, warning of critical damage. The pilot's voice came over comms. "Last chance, Ward. Get in, or we're leaving you." Elias took one final step, and then another blast struck nearby. The shock wave lifted him off his feet and hurled him backward into the dust. The children screamed. The ramp closed. The dropship surged upward, engines roaring as it climbed toward the burning sky. Elias lay on his back, staring after it. His helmet visor cracked, revealing the darkening sky above. He could hear his heartbeat slowing. The Tauran gunship circled once, then stopped firing. It hovered above him silently. For a moment, Elias thought they would finish him, but they didn't. Through the smoke, he saw the gunship's hatch open, and the Tauran pilot step out, armor shining. The alien looked down at him, then at the direction where the human dropship had vanished. Their eyes met across the wreckage. Enemy to enemy, soldier to soldier. The Tauran pilot raised a clawed hand to its chest, a salute. Elias tried to do the same, but his arm wouldn't move. He smiled faintly and whispered the last words he could manage. "Take care of them." The pilot nodded once, then climbed back into the ship. The gunship turned and flew away into the smoke, leaving him alone under the burning sky. Elias closed his eyes. The sounds of war faded into silence. For the first time in years, there was peace. High above, Raven 2 broke atmosphere, carrying 3 small Tauran children who would live to tell their people what had happened on Varian 3, about the human soldier who saved them when no one else would. And across the galaxy, that story would spread, of a man who saw no enemy, only life worth protecting. Captain Elias Ward's final act wasn't war. It was mercy. The war on Varian 3 ended 3 days later. When the smoke finally cleared, nothing remained of the once living world. Only black glass, twisted metal, and silence. The fighting had moved to other fronts, other planets. The galaxy turned its eyes elsewhere. But stories have a way of surviving when soldiers don't. It began with a single transmission, a fragment of footage recorded from a Tauran gunship's camera feed. The image was grainy, but clear enough to see. A lone human soldier, armor cracked and burning, shielding 3 Tauran children as explosions lit the sky. He wasn't firing. He wasn't killing. He was protecting. That image spread faster than any fleet. At first, no one believed it. The Tauran High Council dismissed it as human propaganda. The Earth Command called it a trick, a fabrication by the enemy. But the footage couldn't be faked. The coordinates matched a real battle zone, and the Tauran pilot who filmed it confirmed the truth before the council itself. The alien warrior stood before his leaders and said, in a voice that trembled with emotion, "He did not fight us. He saved our children. He gave his life for them." The galaxy went silent. For 5 long years, both species had hated each other. Humans calling the Tauran monsters, the Tauran calling humans soulless invaders. But now, one act, a single human's choice, had cut through that hatred like a beam of light in the dark. Across 100 worlds, the image of Captain Elias Ward appeared on screens and holodoubles. His last recorded message to command was replayed again and again. They're children. And yes, I'm bringing them home. Simple words. Human words. But they struck deeper than any weapon. On Earth, people gathered in the plazas of ruined cities to watch. No one spoke. Soldiers stood at attention. Civilians cried openly. For the first time since the war began, humans saw something other than blood. They saw meaning. And on Tauran Prime, things changed too. The 3 rescued children were brought before the council. They were still young, still frightened, but alive. They carried with them a small metal tag that the human soldier had worn, his identification tag, marked with 2 simple words, Elias Ward. The eldest child stepped forward, holding it tight in its claws, and said in the broken human tongue it had learned from him, he was brave. He was good. That moment broke something deep inside the Tauran people, something older than the war itself. For the first time, they saw humans not as monsters, but as kin. The High Council declared a ceasefire that same week. Negotiations began soon after, but they weren't easy. Generals on both sides still shouted, politicians still argued, but the people, the millions who lost everything, kept repeating one story, one name, Elias Ward. It became impossible to ignore. Within months, the war that had lasted half a decade came to an end, not because of treaties or victories, but because of one man's mercy. The peace that followed wasn't perfect. Old wounds remained. But when soldiers from both species stood together for the first time, humans in their gray armor, Tauran in their scaled uniforms, they didn't begin with words of politics. They began with silence, a shared silence of respect. And then they built something new, on Varian 3. In the center of the blackened canyon where Elias had made his last stand, both species came together to raise a monument. It wasn't grand or polished, just a single figure carved from the planet's own glass, a man kneeling, shielding 3 children beneath his arms. Beneath it, in both languages, were the words, "He saw no enemy, only life." Every year after, delegations from across the galaxy came to stand before that statue. Some came to honor him. Some came to understand him. And some came just to weep. The Tauran children he had saved grew up under the shared sky of a united world. They became ambassadors, teachers, and dreamers. They told their story countless times, and each time, their voices carried the same truth. He saved us, though he had every reason not to. One of them, the eldest, now grown and wise, once stood before a human crowd and said softly, "We thought humans were the cruelest species in stars. But we were wrong. You are the ones who showed us what courage really means." The crowd stood in silence, some crying, some smiling. Back on Earth, Captain Elias Ward's name was added to the Hall of the Fallen. His portrait, simple, unarmed, eyes tired but kind, hung beside the greatest heroes of human history. But even there he was different. He wasn't honored for killing. He was remembered for saving. Centuries later, children across human and Taran worlds learned his story in their first lessons about peace. Teachers would dim the lights and play the old footage. The human soldier carrying alien children through fire. And somewhere, far beyond those stars, maybe in some corner of the universe where the echoes of war could no longer reach, Captain Elias Ward's spirit rested in knowing that his choice, one quiet act of mercy, had changed everything. The narrator's voice would fade with these final words. In the vast dark of the galaxy, where hatred burned brighter than suns, one man lit a candle and carried it through the storm. His flame did not save himself, but it saved us all. The screen would fade to black. The music would linger, a slow, rising theme of hope, and somewhere in the quiet hearts of those who listened, humanity's truest victory would live on forever.